Iran's currency and economy are on the verge of another crisis. After much haggling between the executive and legislative branches, the Iranian regime's Majlis, the parliament, approved the government's plan to remove the 42,000 rial dollar exchange rate, also referred to as the preferential currency, in the budget of the upcoming Persian calendar year, starting on March 20th. The decision was met with alarm from state-run media and the regime's own officials, who are warning that the new monetary policy will have an immediate negative impact on the economy and reduce the purchasing power of the people, many of whom are already struggling to make ends meet. The plan to restructure the currency policies is surrounded with ambiguities, loose ends, and plenty of space for embezzlement by entities and individuals that have close ties to regime officials. In early 2018, the rial took a sudden plunge, dropping from 42,000 to 50,000 to the US dollar. At the time, the regime opted for a policy of multi-priced currency rating. The official government rate pegged the rial to 42,000 to the dollar, while the free market rate, adjusted based on supply and demand dynamics, continued to plunge and near the 300,000 mark. The regime's declared policy was to regulate the currency exchange rate to prevent the fluctuation of the prices of fundamental goods and protect the population against economic upheavals. But in effect, the new policy created a black market run by regime-backed entities which purchased dollars at the government rate to import vital goods, but made huge profits by selling them at the free market rate. Initially, the 42,000 rial dollar was supposed to be allocated to dozens of items. By mid-2018, the list was culled down to 25 items, and eventually further shrunk to only 7 items, including basic food, such as oats, wheat, and corn, as well as medicine and medical equipment. But even the prices of those items were not spared from the major fluctuations in the currency exchange rate. And they all saw enormous rises as the country's economy continued to stall under the corrupt rule of the mullahs. As Ibrahim Raisi prepared to assume presidency, he declared that his government would drop the 42,000 rial policy, ostensibly to fight corruption. But the regime's own experts warned that at the current point, the new policy will only cause more economic shocks and create other channels of corruption. The government bundled the new monetary policy in the budget bill for the upcoming year. After much back and forth between the Majlis and the government, lawmakers eventually approved the plan on March 6th, with the caveat that the government presents a plan to manage the price of goods that will be affected by the new monetary policy. According to some reports, the removal of the 42,000 rial dollar will save the government $9 billion that was previously spent on subsidizing the import of basic goods. But how will the regime address the economic shock that will entail the new monetary policy? So far, the regime's plan is to subsidize the price of goods by distributing electronic coupons for affected goods. But given the mafia-run structure of Iran's economy, with most levers being in control of the Revolutionary Guards, experts are warning that coupons will eventually create a new black market, not much different from that caused by the preferential currency. Regime-backed entities will continue to make profits, while the needy will be deprived of the subsidies they need. Another policy being deliberated is the readjustment of government cash handouts. The regime will reportedly remove the higher deciles of society from the cash handout policy, while increasing the handouts to the lower deciles. But this plan faces 2 major hurdles. First, the plan is missing details on how recipients are qualified, and second, it is not clear how it will be funded, given the major budget deficit that the regime is already facing. In this regard, the state-run Jahan Sanat newspaper wrote on March 7th, "The Majlis and government both know that these figures won't cover the country's needs. The yearly consumption of wheat is 11 million tons. Wheat that has been purchased with the 42,000 rial currency will now be purchased at rates that exceed 200,000 rials to the dollar. It's improbable that the government will be able to give enough handouts to the people to enable lower deciles to purchase these goods." On the same day, the Jomhuri newspaper warned that the new policy will cause a sudden surge in the price of basic goods. The main factor that has delayed the regime's decision to implement the new monetary policy is the social impact and the implications it can have for the regime. In 2019, the sudden increase of gasoline prices triggered the largest nationwide uprising since the 1979 revolution and pushed the regime to the verge of total collapse. Since then, economic conditions have worsened, and the regime is faced with regular protests that start with economic motives but quickly turn into political protests calling for regime change. At present, regime officials fear that another nationwide economic shock will cause a wave of protests that will be just as intense as the 2019 uprisings. Ali Reza Begi, a member of the Majlis, warned on March 7th that the people are in extremely poor living conditions, and the elimination of the fixed-rate currency will have very dangerous implications. We must be careful that the increase in prices will not cause a repeat of the 2019 protests, he said.